Happy Sunday, friends. Welcome back to another episode. This is going to be anything that we know about the veil, plus my theories on how it was created, where it came from, because really, there's a Wizarding World on Wizarding World website, there is an article about all of the mysteries, all the things in the Department of Mysteries, and in the very last line, there's like all of these questions, and then she just goes, would it be called the Department of Mysteries if it wasn't a mystery? And that pissed me off. I need answers to everything. I'm a questions person. I need answers, so I'm going to find you answers or I'm going to make them up for you. On my TikTok, I have mentioned that I do have this little background fanfic idea going on in the back of my head that I do plan on writing someday. However, that isn't really pertinent to what I'm going to say today. I'm actually not talking about anything that's going to be in the fan fiction. I want to talk about how the veil was created and how it got to the ministry. The only things we truly know canon fact about the veil is that it's in the ministry, it's in the death chamber, it sits up on this stone dice, and dice, I feel like if I'm saying dice, it sounds like roll the dice. It might be dice. We're going to go with dice. Nobody has given me a correct answer on this. But in the movies, we see this sort of mist, but in the books, it's described as a tattered black cloth that kind of ripples as if it would in the wind. It's simply described as being there for as long as the ministry has existed, which, by the way, the Ministry for Magic was established in 1707, and Ulick Gamp was the first Minister for Magic, and he was the chief warlock of Wizengamot before Wizengamot was like this council, which was like basically the acting government of the Wizarding World that preluded the Ministry for Magic. So Ulick Gamp was the chief warlock. Dumbledore was also a chief warlock because Wizengamot was basically turned into the law enforcement council that we see throughout the series. We know the veil is the barrier between the living world and the afterlife, the world of the dead. It's outside of the material plane, which we do see Sirius's physical body fall through and leave the material plane, even though if his body had just dropped onto the floor and had been left in the material plane, his soul still would have traveled through to the afterlife, to the other side of that veil, if it chose to. Now, every single soul, if it is whole and complete, it has the choice to stay in the world as a ghost, as a poltergeist, or it can choose to go on to the afterlife, as most did, because if you choose to stay, you don't ever get a choice again. This is a one-time decision, one way or another. You can't come back as a ghost. You can't go out after you've decided to be a ghost, you know. I have a fun little interview that I found online from like 2008. It's hogwartsprofessor.com. And this is like a scripted interview with J.K. Rowling. To start, there's one quote where she says, "I had not anticipated, although I really should have done, how interested people would be to go beyond the veil." Of course we would have questions. I'm now going to read you everything that J.K. Rowling said. "It's the divide between life and death. I tried to do a nod to that in The Tale of Three Brothers, in reference to the ghost of the second brother of the woman he loved coming back. She was separate from them, though through a veil. You can't go back if you pass through that veil. You cannot come back, or that you can't come back in any form that will make either person happy anyway." So once you're through the veil, your physical form, you cannot come back in a physical form. It is just your soul's essence that can visit the world temporarily. But that's still not a ghost. I need to work on the definition between. To continue, but when they surrounded that veil, let me take a moment here. But when they surrounded that veil, it was not parentheses like that. I did that. When they surrounded that veil, I was trying to show that depending on their degree of skepticism or belief about what lay beyond, and then she goes to talk about the characters. Before I get to that point, let's talk about the fact that JKR says that veil, not the veil, not veil, that veil. So this leads me to believe that there could potentially be more than one, even though there's absolutely zero evidence that accounts to that at all. And honestly, my theory has absolutely nothing to do with multiple veils, but that line, just like if the world lives in your head, you don't make slips like that. Like you say things exactly how you mean. So if in her mind there is more than one veil, she would say that veil. If in her mind there was only one, she would say the veil. It's Freudian slip. It's not something that she necessarily did intentionally, but it's her subconscious telling us exactly how she sees it in her mind, is how I'm perceiving this sentence. Moving on to the next point is that she goes on to say that Luna is not a skeptical character. She firmly believes in an afterlife. She's very clear on that. Let's see. She feels them speaking or hears them speaking much more clearly than Harry does. This is the idea of faith. Harry thinks he can hear them, he's drawn on. But Harry had a life that is so imbued with death that he now has uncharacteristically strong curiosity about the afterlife, especially for a boy of 15, as he is in Phoenix. Ron's just scared. As I think Ron would be, he just knows that there is something he doesn't want to dabble with. Hermione, hyper-rational, can't hear anything get away from the veil is her quote. So if you walk through the veil, you're dead, you're dead. What you find on the other side, well, that's the question. If you walk through the veil, you're dead, period. You're dead, period. What you find on the other side, that's the question. Yeah, that is the question. This now gives me the idea that it depends on the person. That if Hermione walked through, her soul would cease to exist. If Harry walked through, he could be brought back by the resurrection stone. Ron would be afraid, but we don't know if he would accept it or deny it. So maybe this has something to do with each person's individual relationship to it, because as we know, Thestrals can only be seen if you have processed death. Not if you've seen death, if you have actually processed it. And that's why he doesn't see it until well after Cedric's death, because he had to process it before he could actually see them. So maybe the veil kind of plays along some of these rules, whereas if you believe in this afterlife or whatever you find on the other side of the veil is determinant of you and what you believe in your soul. And if you process death, if you're not afraid of death, if you're not afraid of the afterlife. There is a truly wonderful comment on this article by somebody named Inked that they go through. I mean, it's phenomenal what they write. It's far too long for me to read. But at the end, they talk about if the overarching theme of Harry Potter is death and our response to it, as I believe it would be, then then he goes on to like compliment her, but we're not going to compliment her. But I do agree with this person that death and your relationship or your acceptance of it is a huge theme throughout the entire series, and really is probably the biggest and main overarching theme. I think they hit that, that nail on the head with that is the main theme. A lot of things like the veil, Thestrals, and Dementors allude to that. So let's start creeping our way towards Dementors. In this timeline of everything, because I'm a stickler about the timeline and making sure everything orders out and falls into place and sits correctly. On the Wizarding World website, I found a couple articles that I read, but it basically says that Azkaban was turned into a prison after the the International Statute of Secrecy was put into place and enforced, because they were really worried that all of their little prisons were going to have a prison break. Sorry, my cat's scratching his scratchy post. But what bothers me is that it says the Ministry decided after the International Statute of Secrecy had been put into place. The Ministry did not exist until 1707. This law was put into place in 1692. The Ministry didn't make that decision about the Statute of Secrecy. That was the Wizengamot. I have absolutely no idea where the Wizengamot practiced their politics before the Ministry was established. So that's still in question. Again, with my frustration with the timeline, I can't find a year, a date, a general-ish of when the rest of the Wizarding World finally found the island that is Azkaban, where Acristus had died, and they found this island of one singular Wizarding man's dead body, infested island with Dementors, and quote-unquote, what did I write down? The least frightening part was that the place was infested with Dementors. So what the hell else was on that island, if the Dementors, the hordes of Dementors, not just one, a horde of Dementors, was less frightening. What I do know is that the island was found after years after he died, after something, the concealment charms faded. The island was found by the wizarding world, and the wizards that found it didn't speak about it, they didn't talk about it, and they feared moving the Dementors because they didn't know what kind of repercussions that would have. So they just left the island unchecked for years, until 1718 when who was it? Oh, Democritus Rowell, that's who it was. Democritus Rowell, when he became Minister for Magic after Ulick Gamp, he was the one that proposed that Azkaban be used as a prison and Dementors would be the prison guards. But that was 1718. Statute of Secrecy has been around since 1692. So what have we been doing for all of these years? Were these all of the years that they left the island unchecked? At what point did they discover the island? I don't know. But we do know that Acristus went out there sometime in the 15th century. So 15th century, he goes out there, concealment charms, blah, 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 practicing dark magic, creating whatever the hell he wants to create. And he is the supposed assumed creator of Dementors because he was his dead body was found on the island and there was just a bunch of Dementors around him. We do know that for many, many, many years while he was on this island, he would lure muggles and muggle sailors out to his island and just use them as practice dummies for all of his experiments. There are essentially two branches of thought when it comes to how a Dementor is made, and then there's two more branches of thought to how they breed and how they procreate. To define a little bit, a Dementor is an amortal being, meaning it was never alive, it cannot die, it is simply an entity that exists. I'm gonna be real honest with you guys right now. This is my old tiny notebook that I was using before I got my Big Daddy notebook for all of my Harry Potter crap and things. So this was the one I was using when I first got started before I knew that I was gonna be able to do this and everything. And so the notes I made on the two different theories are kind of blurring together. I don't even feel like these are two different theories. These just both kind of make sense. Okay, so I have that when a soul is removed, it becomes the Dementor. So that Avada Kedavra rips the soul from a body, and one man's soul was so tortured that when his soul was removed, whether he used Avada Kedavra or if something else killed him and his soul went to leave his body, that it took the form of a Dementor, because a soul is what keeps your corporeal form earthbound. But the other one is basically an obscurial theory, because obscurials also experience extreme hopelessness and despair, and that through magic, new magic can be created, that one man was just so tortured and the conditions were so extreme that that person turned into a Dementor that sucks out souls. Do these not sound like the exact same thing to you? Because I'm having a really hard time differentiating between this right now. This sounds like the exact same thing. Now, Christus could be considered the original Dementor if we're going off of the idea that it's when your soul leaves that soul becomes the thing. But Dementors are described as looking like decaying, dead, gray, scaly bodies, but they can't be human bodies because a human body wouldn't grow from a regular size to 12 feet tall, you know? I think either one of his unfortunate muggle victims was the first Dementor, or he himself was the first Dementor. But let's talk about the two different ways that they can breed. Two theories about two different ways they might possibly breed. They can't breed in two different ways. There's just two ideas about how it could possibly be done. Now, if you're going off of the theory that as a soul, as a Dementor is kissing you and they have extracted your soul, that soul then turns into a Dementor, that would then base the Dementor creation theory on a soul was so tortured that when it was removed, it came out as this awful decrepit thing, that the physical body doesn't turn into anything else. The physical body is left behind and the soul becomes this other entity, this other form, because a soul moves on to the afterlife. A soul moves on to the afterlife. A ghost cannot be killed, although it has been alive. would a soul essence allow you to become something that's amortal? Because a Dementor is something that's never been alive, and a ghost is not amortal because it had been alive. So if your soul comes from a living being, then it had been alive, so it can't be amortal. I'm really stumped right now. I'm just sitting here thinking. We're gonna loop back to this point in a minute. Hold on. Let's talk about the other school of thought on how Dementors produce more Dementors. And they're in Half-Blood Prince. Fudge says that it's very misty for a July, it's a misty day, and Fudge is like, yeah, that means the Dementors are breeding. I actually have it written down exactly. That's right, they're breeding. That's what's causing all the mist, which is Fudge in Half-Blood Prince. So essentially, a Dementor has to have this cold environment of hopelessness and despair to survive, to find its victims, to do all of these things. So a cold, hopeless, like just their presence brings cold and mist. So they themselves, their own existence, really does make the perfect conditions for breeding. And the only way to curb breeding is by changing those conditions to make it harder for them to breed. But you can't stop them from breeding. You can't stop them from creating. We've never seen a tiny Dementor, so we just assume that they just come out full grown because there's no growing, as they're not alive and not dead. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe just the environment at Azkaban was so hopeless and so desperate and just so tragic and dark and sad that of the environment, of the magic in the air, this thing formulated and formed that maybe the first one, maybe it was just a really misty, gross day. There was all of this death, there was all of this decay, there was all of this hopelessness, all of this sadness, all of this depression, that this whole island just had all of this magic and horribly dark energy, that just from that, this thing simply came to exist. And that is the only thing that I can think to actually reason with the fact that they're amortal. Because I, simply by what I said on the soul being extracted, that cannot be what makes a Dementor, because Dementors are amortal having never been alive, and ghosts are not amortal because they were alive. And even when the resurrection stone brings you back, that is like your soul was alive. Your soul was alive. So a soul cannot create a Dementor because a Dementor is amortal, because that would then mean that the first Dementor was made from a soul and then everything else after that was amortal. That just doesn't make sense to me. I think it was just that the environment was so hopeless and that there was so much dark energy and dark magic in the air that this thing simply came into existence. But now we need to talk about the veil again, because I've just gone on a really long tangent about Dementors. In a few of the descriptions of Dementors and the veil independently, they do sound similar, and it is said very, 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 very commonly throughout the fandom that people, think of one or the other when reading one or the other. And even with the movie depicting the veil as being like this mist, Dementors breed off of mist, so to me it still connects, even though it's not the black tattered cloth that matches the tattered cloth that is the Dementor. I think it is very, very, very plausible that Acristus, the man who ever so accidentally, maybe or maybe on purpose, created Dementors, that he had also created the veil on that island, and that when whoever these wizards are that went and discovered this island, whenever they went out there and were so shooketh about everything that happened, they found the veil, and many people didn't come back because they went through the veil and they had no idea what happened to them. So to understand it and to figure out where these people went, they cut the stone out of the ground, which is where we get this raised dais, and they moved it because it just simply doesn't seem like something you can move, So I think they cut it out of the ground and moved the thing as a whole and took it to wherever that they could stuff it away and study it. I also think that with the Statute of Secrecy and finding this island and that all of this shit was going down, I think this might have been also part of the reason why they were like, no, we need a more solid, expansive, established form of government because we're finding all this kind of shit, and who's going to look at it? Who's going to study this? Who's going to work on these things? Who's going to, regulate all of these magical creatures? Who's going to deal with all of these artifacts and things? Yeah, So if the veil was put there, then that means that all the other things, all the other rooms, the brain room, the time room, the love chamber, all the other rooms in the Department of Mysteries are things that the government has found that they can't understand. This is the Area 50. This is the Area 51 of the Wizarding World. Anything that they don't understand, they're like, we'll just take this home with us. We'll figure it out later. We've got unspeakables that'll figure it out. Noodle it out. So I think that they left it unchecked. They're like, we don't even know what to do with this. We have so many questions. And then they were like, okay, things need to change. This isn't working. We've got to figure something out. And then when the Ministry of Magic was established, that the veil was moved there to be studied, because they then established the entire department, all of these different sectors of this government, to deal with all of these things, to keep the Wizarding World safe and a secret. And that's why it was well into the ministry existing and the veil being there that it was the second minister that then finally suggested we go back to the island and take and figure and make it a prison and do all of these other things.
Okay, good morning. I have an interjection to make because I had continued research after filming this. By the way, I filmed this YouTube like 2 weeks ago, and I'm literally just doing the editing this morning. I just got back from my trip yesterday. I'm exhausted, but I have something to add that I found that adds to my theory. So, correction, the Department of Mysteries is not stuff that the government or I'm so tired. The Department of Mysteries was not created by the Ministry of Magic. It predates the Ministry of Magic and actually acts outside of it, and they have no control over them either. 15 different ministers of magic have tried to shut down this department, and they're like, no, you don't tell us what to do. The law enforcement, they're like, no, you don't tell us what to do. We act on our own. We're doing our own thing down here. So everything down there is from the unspeakables, from the people that created the department. We have no idea who created the department, but the Ministry of Magic wasn't founded until 1707. However, the earliest mention of the Department of Mysteries was actually 1672, so like a good chunk of time. So whenever they're like, yeah, the veil has been there for like before the ministry. Oh, Tiny Dark Lord's back, by the way. Yeah, they're like, whenever the veil's been there since before the ministry. Yeah, because the Department of Mysteries was there before the ministry. This was also during a time where the Wizengamot was still active. So the International Statute of Secrecy wasn't until it was 1684, I think. Correction, it was signed in 1689 and it went into effect in 1692. But again, this was before they even, from my understanding, started the idea of a more formal government, or even started the idea of the International Statute of Secrecy. We know that the island where Acristus was, it was found, and they were just like, okay, this is horrifying, we're not going to touch this, we're not going to do anything with it, and they left it for years. Undisclosed amount of time. So could it be that people from the Wizengamot found it, they're like, yeah, we're not touching this, and then after the Ministry of Magic was founded and a couple ministers went through, then the minister that was like, oh, we should totally use this as a prison. I cut myself off. We should use this as a prison. This is a great idea. So it was like the second Prime Minister of Magic, Democritus Rao, in 1718, he became Minister of Magic. So in his reign, he made that Azkaban a prison. So to me, this just really lines up with my timeline.
It said the island was left unchecked for years. I know, I can't find it, but I know I saw a Harry Potter wiki page where it said 500 years, and then I went on a rabbit hole trying to figure out where they got the 500 to fact check them, and I couldn't really find anything. Please just know that I never take anything I read off of any source for granted, that I always double and triple check everything I find before I repeat it to you as if it's fact. And I would like to make the connection that what if a Dementor is a soul that's been brought back from the veil, but again, that just loops me back to it was once living, so it can't be immortal. But what came first, the chicken or the egg? The veil or the Dementors? But what if the veil was also not entirely created intentionally, that it simply came into existence because so many souls were dying in one place that it just existed, and that is what souls were passing through, that so many souls were coming from the same place that this archway became itself. Yeah. Nobody knows what else was on that island with those Dementors that was even worse than them, so I would be horrified to find out, and I have no interest in it, but it's the fact that this wasn't something that made her publisher, her editor, whoever it was, throw up, that it was the Horcruxes, and that this, I don't even know that she even had a story about that she simply just said it was just worse than the Dementors. But that's the theory I have for you guys today. Let me know what you think. Let me know how you feel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you guys next Sunday. Thank you so much for all of your love and support. I love you all. Bye.